In 1970, the Neil Simon written American comedy called The Out-of-Towners was released to theaters. It stars Jack Lemmon and Sandy Dennis and was directed by Arthur Hiller. It's the story about George and Gwen Hillerman, who live in a small, quiet town called Twin Oaks, Ohio, with their young children and pet dog. George has a real strong sense of what is right and wrong, especially as that applies to himself and Gwen. But he constantly looks for validation from her. Working for a plastics company, he believes he is a shoo-in for the company's vice president of sales. This position is located in New York City. He has dreams of the future of their life with all the amenities and benefits that a large city has to offer. He has a 9 a.m. interview the following morning, and he and Gwen have plans in New York after their 8 p.m. landing, where they will dine at New York's finest restaurant, the Four Seasons, and spend a comfortable night at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel before he goes to the interview. But absolutely nothing on the trip goes according to plan. In fact, what can go wrong does. Because of all the circumstances that are created, it even looks like he might miss the interview altogether. In the 15 hours preceding the planned interview process, George and Gwen have decided to see if they're going to let New York get the better of them, or if they're going to get the better of New York. The entire movie is 97 minutes of incredible complications, which threaten everything they do. They find the city strike-bound, mugger-infested, rain-soaked, bureaucracy-bound, inhospitable as it could be. Jack Lemmon is excellent in this role, as he always is on screen. His dialogue is so sharp and witty as he defies the compounding aggravations of the big city, his raging helplessness, his whistling desperation through his chipped tooth, taking the name and number of every attendant that helped create his delay and disturbances. His portrayal of this role constructs it into a delightful comedy. Sandy Dennis is remarkable in her role, too, and she doesn't get enough credit in any of the films that she's in, and her comedy timing is impeccable. Many of the smaller supporting roles were cast with well-known comedians, and although most of them are very brief, each one of them is special. Most notably, you'll see Ann Meares playing of a despairing robbery victim, Ann Prentice playing a condescending airline stewardess, Ron Carey as a Boston cab driver, Billy D. Williams as an airline clerk, Anthony Holland's role as a hotel desk clerk, and Graham Jarvis as a stick-up man. The cinematography is great, too. That was done by Andrew Laszlo. He not only manages to capture the city and its claustrophobic environment, but also the very authentic nighttime shots with appropriate gritty color. As the plane flies in for them to land in New York, the bases of the newly begun World Trade Center towers had risen to like 10 stories or so, and they're visible in the scenic view of Manhattan from their airplane. This is one of, or if maybe not the last, film to show the old pre-World Trade Center skyline of Lower Manhattan, which had changed very little from the early 1930s to the late 60s. The film, being shot in 1969, was just prior to a slew of new office buildings, among them the World Trade Center, that would change the whole look of the New York skyline. It was reported that the then New York mayor, John Lindsay, was not a fan of the film, as it portrayed New York in a very negative light. But you got to remember, New York was pretty negative during that time. The transit and sanitation strikes that are seen in the film mirror the real-life strikes that happened in 1966 and 1968. These strikes, among other things, as well as the city's dramatic increase in crime, would haunt Lindsay for his 2 terms as mayor. The film went on to be remade 29 years later, in 1999, and that one starred Steve Martin and Goldie Hawn. That was an extremely well-done film, too. If you haven't seen that one, check it out. Although this is subtly mentioned by Sandy Barone's character of Lenny Moyers while he's throwing the Kellermans out of the church. The majority of the film takes place on Holy Thursday. This is pretty evident when Moyers says that they are setting up for a television rehearsal for Easter Sunday Mass services on Sunday. Placing the day on Thursday is revealed by the Waldorf Astoria's hotel clerk, who tells the Kellermans that they have lost their room since the reservations were for Wednesday the 17th, and they have arrived in the early morning hours of Thursday the 18th. Consequently, just a point of trivia, neither in 1969, the year the movie was filmed, nor in 1970, when it was released, had the 17th and the 18th of April fallen on a Wednesday and Thursday. The writer Neil Simon originally intended for this to be a segment of the play Plaza Suite in 1968, which eventually was adapted for the screen in 1971. This part was entitled Visitor from Toledo and was intended to open the play on Broadway, but it was cut during the rehearsal period of the show. They had it in the initial rehearsals all the way up until the 5th day, and that's when Mike Nichols said that they just had too much to show and that they needed to cut something. He said if he didn't do that, the curtain wouldn't be coming down until after midnight. The airport scene showing the Kellermans' departure was filmed at MacArthur Airport in Long Island, and they board the same type of airplane that D.B. Cooper hijacked in November of 1971. That was a Boeing 727, which was one of the most popular aircraft of that era. Unlike many of Neil Simon's efforts, which were written as plays first, then adapted into films, Simon wrote this directly for the screen when he realized that a play of this nature would just be too difficult in portraying the many different locations that are involved in it. This is the first of 3 films written by Neil Simon and directed by Arthur Hiller. The second one being Plaza Suite from 1971 that we mentioned just a few minutes ago. And the third was the 1984 The Lonely Guy, which starred Steve Martin. And then Steve went on to star in the movie's remake in 1999. Jack Lemmon was almost killed during this production. And this was during the scene where the manhole cover explodes. The blast was much stronger than anybody on the set anticipated, and instead of only lifting the manhole cover a few inches up and away from the hole, it threw it several feet into the air. A few seconds later, it falls hard to the ground, very close to Jack Lemmon's head. The actor was hit in his left leg after the cover bounced, and although he was startled and in pain, he stayed in character. This shot is the one that you see in the final film. The movie had its premiere May 28, 1970, at Radio City Music Hall in New York, with the general release to be done in 326 theaters on June 24th in all major U.S. cities. Take a look at this well-acted, well-written comedy. It's a lot of fun to watch. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.